Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, and welcoming back David Anderson ahead of the final regular season game against Maryland on Saturday, November 25th at 3:30, airing on the Big Ten Network. Wanted to first start, David, just talking about the Maryland pass game. Obviously, they are number 2 right now, I think, in the Big Ten play in terms of air attack. We saw them be able to move the ball against Michigan last week. Did cost them as well, but just wanted to get your thoughts on that aspect of this matchup, and also the fact that Rutgers has been very good against the pass this year. So it's really strength for strength, and I think kind of the key to this game.
Yeah, I think Rutgers, like you said, has had tremendous success when they've been placing their opponent in obvious passing situations. If they can make their opponent one-dimensional. And a lot of that has come when Rutgers has been able to take the lead, but it also has come in certain times where, like in that Michigan State game, Michigan State really couldn't run the ball that much. They couldn't really pass the ball other than, penalties. And so I think this is the key matchup in the game. I mean, if Rutgers defensive backs are going to have to match up one-on-one, Maryland has 3 good receivers. They don't really go more than that with Jones, Prather, and Felton. They're talking about all 3 as NFL prospects, even though, for example, Ja'Shawn Jones is actually his PFF grade is below Jaquay Jackson. So he's ranked 6th. Prather is ranked 17th. And then Felton is actually below Ian Strong and Christian Dremel in terms of like how it's being viewed for him. Talia Tagovailoa is, I believe, cracked the top 10 all time in passing yards in the Big Ten last week. So congratulations to him. He's actually ranked behind Tyler Mordecai, though, in terms of his effectiveness. Obviously, we know how Rutgers struggled against Mordecai a little bit. But, I mean, between the combination of the quarterback and receivers, if you even individually, if they're not scoring at the top, this is probably the second or third best passing attack in the Big Ten when all is said and done. So a lot comes down to, can Rutgers hold up in man coverage? I think one of the big factors, especially with someone like Ja'Shawn Jones, he's a veteran, he does a pretty good job of locating balls and not giving it away. So if the defensive back is kind of face guarding him, he doesn't start his hands early, or he doesn't like use his eyes to kind of alert the defensive back that the ball is about to come so that they can put their hand up. He waits to the last possible second to make the play, which is something he's improved on over the course of his career. And so there are things like that where those little subtleties, Rutgers just cannot be victimized either by getting pass interference or, just not seeing the ball basically. So it's going to be a really, really tough challenge for the Rutgers defensive backs, particularly because Maryland uses these 3 receivers, and then as a tight end, I think they pronounce it Deaches. Their receiving tight end, he is not a good blocker, but he's a good receiver. And then in running situations, they go with another tight end. I believe it's Howard is his name, who is like an okay run blocker for a tight end, but he doesn't catch the ball much. So hopefully you can use some of those tells in terms of personnel packages about what is probably coming. But other than that, they're just going to have to hold up in the secondary.
Yeah, and Maryland right now is last in the Big Ten in conference play in the rushing attack. So, we saw last season Maryland kind of carve Rutgers up with the pass. I guess what is the biggest hope in terms of them being able to be more effective this year in terms of slowing down? I feel like Twala hasn't had as good of a year this year overall, just in terms of his efficiency and accuracy. But in terms of, I guess, do you think that we see a similar approach that Rutgers had last year defensively, or do you think that based on the personnel they have this year, that there will be a little bit different approach?
I think it's going to be fairly similar. When you look at that game last year, the final score was obviously terrible, but Rutgers did get 2 turnovers early in the game, and the defense was playing pretty tough. The problem was Rutgers could not score or move the ball. I mean, that was the bigger issue. I think the defense held up for some time. With Maryland, their running game last week did score 3 touchdowns. They used their backup quarterback, Billy Edwards, and he ran 3 tush pushes touchdowns. So their 3 touchdowns all came on the same play. And it was all between center and I believe right guard, because they have a good center, Harris, and then they also have the right guard is a good run blocker. Bullock, I think, is playing right guard. And so, but beyond that, they don't really have like an ability to kind of shove you back in the run game.
Right.
So I think you have to take your chances with letting them run against non-stack boxes, and you can't let them beat you deep, especially because if they get matchups on the outside where they know it's one-on-one coverage, like a corner with no safety help down the perimeter, like on the outside line routes, Tagovailoa is going to complete those. He's really good at it. It's basically like watching an NFL offense in terms of if they get those one-on-one matchups, they can take advantage of it. You need to put them in a position where you can have safeties help, or at least the threat of a safety helping, so that he can't just pre-snap know, hey, I'm going to get this matchup one-on-one. I mean, Rutgers has good corners, but so does Michigan, and Maryland was able to make plays against them. So I think you're going to have to – I think Rutgers is going to have to let Maryland run the ball a little bit more than they have against other teams and make sure they don't get beat by the pass. I think that's what you – I think that's kind of what you have to do, because Maryland – they can complete those 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10 passes that we've seen pretty much 10 of the 14 teams in the Big Ten can't, that if they get in 3rd and long, that most of the teams can't do anything. But Maryland's one that can. And so, yeah, it's almost like Giants-Bills Super Bowl 25 situation, that if you have Maryland in a 3rd and 4, they might try to run it and you might stop it. But if they're always in 3rd and 8, they're going to convert some of them. So there's really not too much difference between what they can do on 3rd and long and what they can do on 3rd and medium. And so there's not really too much of a point of trying to ensure they stay in 3rd and long, because Tagovailoa, he'll complete a pass beyond the sticks if it's 3rd and 8. If it's 3rd and 4, they'll run the same pass play and he'll throw it beyond the sticks as well. Like it's not – I don't think in fact – their 3rd down conversion percentage on 3rd and short, when I was looking at it, is actually terrible. It's actually the same pretty much as 3rd and medium, which is also not that much better than 3rd and long. So I don't want Rutgers to change their entire defensive philosophy, but Maryland is going to try to just go to that tush push in 3rd and short. And that just shows how desperate they are to just convert on 3rd and shorts, because they haven't been able to do other things other than just throw it downfield like they normally do. So I think Rutgers is going to go with a similar game plan to last year, but we'll talk a little bit about this more in general. I think Rutgers has to come out as an aggressor at the same time. And how you balance those two things is really what defensive coordinator Joe Harcimiak is going to have to do, because whoever comes out firing this game emotionally is going to have the edge.
Yeah, it's a great point. And that kind of is a good segue to what I wanted to ask, is that aside from the Maryland pass offense being a strength going against the Rutgers strength of the pass defense, Maryland has the philosophy offensively that a lot of Rutgers fans wish, and we both talked about just Rutgers being more aggressive in the pass game. Obviously, criticisms are out there with the way the offense played against Penn State. Gavin Wimsatt, I thought had some really good moments in that game. But again, the play calling I thought was ultra conservative, did not do him any favors in terms of building momentum. And the Maryland pass offense you saw against Michigan, it did burn them at times, and maybe I guess you could say cost them the game, but it also kept them in the game.
Right.
Do you think there's any chance that Rutgers is going to employ that philosophy, or are we looking at status quo type situation, or does it change because you are playing a high volume pass offense?
I think Rutgers is going to double down on what they do best offensively, because when you look at what happened with Maryland and Nebraska was moving the ball, especially right up the gut. And so Rutgers definitely has an advantage with their interior line. Even if Zelinskis and Felter are undersized, they should be able to move some people around a little bit in this game. Kind of to wrap your point about Maryland, they were down 23-3, against Michigan, and they lost by a touchdown, and they threw an interception once, maybe twice on drives that could have tied the game. So they had a shot, and they gave away 11 points on 2 safeties. One was an intentional grounding call, and one was an aborted punt that the punter just kicked the ball out of the end zone. And then another 7 points came on trying to pass deep in their own territory, and Tagovailoa got – I don't even know if it was a strip sack or he just kind of lost the ball, but the ball kind of squirted out, and Michigan returned it like 7 yards or something for a touchdown. It was real short. Yeah. And so when Greg Schiano sees something like that, he kind of like locks up and is like, we are not going to be having our quarterback holding the ball like a loaf of bread inside of our own 10 to allow a situation like that. He simply will never do that. So I don't think Rutgers is going to really try to open up the pass game. It comes a little bit down to scheme as well with the Maryland defense, because first of all, they're vulnerable up the middle, number one. So what have they tried to do and to right the ship over the last basically 3 weeks to get out of their losing streak is they've pretty much they've doubled down on their strengths defensively, which is their cornerbacks are going to press the receivers, and then their linebacker, Basham or Barham, I think it is. Barham, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Deshaun Barham. He's not good in coverage. So what have they done is they've kind of just let him float around. And so he had a key interception against Michigan when Michigan was about to score before the end of the first half last week. And so him and then their safeties, Braid and Trader, they kind of just been floating around and looking to make plays. So what you'll see a lot of times is there'll be a corner right on a receiver, and then there'll be a safety or linebacker kind of lurking in the area trying to read the quarterback's eyes. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds for the Rutgers passing attack, who has struggled to just throw the ball accurately and get separation. I don't think they're going to get separation. And then there's going to be a guy over the top as well a lot of the time. So Rutgers is going to have to just run the ball, especially up the middle, and force Maryland to commit extra defenders so there's less guys that are, in coverage. We talk all the time about how in the modern day, usually you need to throw to set up the run. I think this is going to be back to an old school run the ball to set up the pass type situation for Rutgers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting. I mean, obviously turnovers are always an important factor, but Maryland's number 2 in conference play with 10 interceptions in 8 games. Rutgers is third to last, just 4 interceptions. I think it's going to be really imperative that they force some turnovers to potentially get short fields, especially if they are going to be a run first, which we know they will. And then also sacks by. Maryland is third in the conference with 22 sacks in 8 games. And Rutgers is just 13th. So as good as the defense has been, they haven't been forcing turnovers and they haven't been getting sacks in conference play. So I think that's a little bit concerning. On the flip side, Maryland defense, is on paper, I don't think as good as Rutgers, but they've been very good in doing those two things, which gives even more credence to the fact that Rutgers is not going to risk it too much in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about Maryland's pass rush, I guess, is that part of it is out of necessity, kind of like I was kind of ragging on Christian Hackenberg a little bit last week in the Penn State preview about how because of his limitations, you kind of have to just do what he does. Maryland's pass rush is kind of a combination that everyone on their defense can pass rush a little bit, and then also that some of their guys are not as good, especially linebackers, are not as good in coverage. So rather than just kind of force them to cover people, sometimes it's smarter to just let them blitz a little bit, kind of push the envelope and try to make plays that way. And so I think Maryland, their defense kind of dictates that that's how they have to play to have success, is bring a lot of different guys, especially those who are not as good in coverage. Like their linebackers are not good in coverage as a group at all. And so it just makes more sense to blitz them. And so I think you're going to have to just wear them down with the run and have them having to decide, okay, is a run coming or a pass coming? Because sometimes with your assignment as a defensive front 7 player, your assignment is basically the same run or pass. It's like, if there's a run, I've got this gap. if there's a pass, I'm blitzing through this gap. Those situations make it simpler as a defensive player, especially if you're a linebacker. But if you can run a little bit to the outside and force them to kind of get washed down in the action, then that's where Rutgers can have success. They need to be able to at least threaten that the option to the outside is there. So with Nebraska, most of their runs were up the middle, but they were running a quarterback keeper or like a pitch or a jet sweep type of play enough that the Maryland players couldn't just fill the middle. Because when we talked about, one of the worst games in Rutgers history, in my opinion, was the second, or worst halves, was that second half collapse against Maryland in 2015, where Rutgers just kept running it up the middle, running up the middle, and there was no threat of anything to the outside, no jet sweep, no pitch, no toss, nothing. And so they were able to just funnel their defensive players inside. That's what you have to do against this Maryland team. Even if you don't pass, you have to make them account for the run in several different areas. And because their defensive line has not been that as strong in the run game, you can usually create angles to seal off second-level defenders. And so that's really where you got to be a little bit creative. I think Monungai this is a good Monungai game if he can come into this game healthy, because what you see a lot of times with him is the line kind of crashes down. There's like kind of a pile of people, and then he can kind of bounce it outside with a quick burst. I mean, he's not like breakaway speed burst, but he can kind of accelerate, and then like linebackers don't see him or there's opportunities there. But it won't work if like outside defenders, because Maryland's corners are good against the run. They are also, in fact, for their position, they're probably the best guys against the run in their whole defense, again, relative to position. And so, if their corners are crashing in and sealing that perimeter, it's going to be tough. So Rutgers wide receivers are going to have to block well, and they're really going to have to at least have the possibility of going inside or outside in the run game.
Yeah, that's it's true about Monungai. He doesn't have the breakaway speed, but it's like once he gets out into open space, he's got enough momentum that he's really hard to bring down. And you bring up a good point, which I think is, my biggest concern in this game is how healthy is Rutgers. Obviously, every team is at the end of the road here, the regular season, and Maryland has their
Maryland. They seem to be the healthiest team in the Big Ten.
Well, I was going to say, but they have bumps and bruises, right? But I mean, they have been relatively healthy. And I do think that Rutgers is pretty beat up going into this game. I think that Schiano, is not going to say it, obviously, but I think you could kind of read between the lines in some of his comments. So, is Monungai healthy? And if he's not, Sam Brown got more run the other day. Again, Aaron Young has been kind of MIA in terms of getting opportunities. So how they're effective in running it, Monungai's health is a huge factor in this game. But overall, too, I mean, Felter, Dunlap, Sutton, they all kind of got banged up or were dealing with stuff in that Penn State loss. Zelinkus, I have to imagine, is dealing with some stuff. He had a couple penalties, a little bit out of character for him. I think knowing what they want to do and actually being able to execute it and be able to have that physicality necessary is going to be two different stories, I think.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about it, like a lot of what I'm saying, and a lot of times you'll use the term put linebackers into conflict, where they have to decide, okay, am I going to go with this receiver because it might be a pass? Am I going to go in the run? Or if I have two assigned run gaps, which one am I going to go to? And a lot of that comes down to if your offensive line can hold or have a good surge to push the defensive line backwards, the linebackers might not be able to decide fast enough before all of a sudden they're kind of what we call washing down, where you can't get to your assignment. There's just no lane for you to get there. And so, I mean, Rutgers, I don't think a single offensive lineman played the whole game last week. I think everybody came out for a couple plays. And so, I mean, this is a Dunlap type game. Like, to me, that's an X factor. Or if he can't go, one of the guards Rutgers has is going to have to open up some run holes. Like, they're going to have to, because, I mean, there's only one defensive lineman on Maryland who's a plus run defender, and that's, I believe, Phillips, the defensive tackle, Jordan Phillips. No one else is a plus run defender. So don't let these guys kind of breathe, basically. Yeah. Like you have to just push them back, wear them down a little bit, and then hopefully, it obviously against Penn State, kind of going to the game, what I was kind of saying about Rutgers not being able to generate a run push. I texted Aaron, I texted you like very second drive. And I'm like, it's basically amazing that Rutgers has been able to move the ball when as soon as the running back gets it, there's like 2 or 3 guys in the backfield. So part of that is, well, Penn State was really strong. They were filling the gaps. They were shooting up. But part of it was a good scheme by Rutgers in the run game. Because if you're letting defenders come through and there's not tackling somebody, right, or at least they're not going to, maybe they get a hand, but they don't get like a good like opportunity to wrap up. That's actually a pretty good scheme to kind of let them over pursue. And so there's some things like that I was happy with. So I'm having more confidence going to this game that if Maryland tries to basically just run blitz, that Rutgers will be able to kind of kick those guys outside and or at least redirect them so they don't have a free shot at the ball carrier in the backfield. But all this comes down to who's going to want it more. When Rutgers has the ball, who wants it more? The Rutgers offensive line or the Maryland front seven? Like, we haven't had many games like this where we've talked about like literally this comes down to who wants it more. But this is one of those games that's going to come down to that when Rutgers has the ball particularly.
Well, and this is one of those, I mean, Sean was asked about it on Monday about, the whole 1-0 thing, but with all that's at stake in this game, I mean, history's on the line. Rutgers has never won 4 Big Ten games before. This is an opportunity to do that. This is an opportunity to clinch the first 1A season in 9 years. They would clinch 4th place and finish above Maryland, Michigan State, and Indiana in the last year ever of the Big Ten East. Some people might not like the whole 4th place, but it is significant in arguably the toughest division in college football. There's a lot of positives that can be generated from a win in terms of putting a stamp on this season. And for the seniors playing in their last game at home, you have to imagine that's a huge motivation factor. Again, it goes back for me to how healthy are they as a group to be able to do that. But they shouldn't be lacking motivation in any regard. And if anything, have more so in this game.
Yeah, I mean, Maryland's kind of a strange team in that regard, too. Like, they sometimes are a little bit slow at starting if they – well, let me say it this way. There are games they come out firing if they get a couple quick passes and, like, they get a momentum. Whereas if they come out and they get punched in the mouth a little bit or they're just being out muscled, they kind of get a little tentative. And so you really have to put your stamp on at the beginning of the game. You cannot make turnovers. So this is why I think Rutgers is going to double down because you can't give them reasons to get the momentum. Because if they do, Maryland is going to start throwing the ball. Now, we know the run game's not good. So if Rutgers does – or if Maryland does take a lead, they don't have the ability to just like pound the rock and kind of run the clock out. So there's reason for optimism there, whereas there might not have, like there wasn't the last 2 weeks, basically, where, Penn State and Iowa, they can pound the rock a little bit. They'll at least wear you down. And again, I think Maryland, they have a good center, a good guard. Their left tackle is a good pass blocker, not as great in the run blocking. And so, don't give up hope in this game if Maryland goes up 14-0, right? Like, I don't want to sound bad because I think my score predictions have been a little too accurate early in games when I was like, well, it might be – that's not good. But if they do, Rutgers can make a comeback, even if they can stick to the game plan. You don't have to abandon it to start passing. It's not – I mean, these guys they basically just look like an NFL team on both sides. Like most NFL teams can't run the ball. They just throw the ball mostly. Even on 3rd, and 8, they can get it. And then defensively, they're opportunistic. They're not great in any one area, but Maryland at this is, of course, but their safeties will float around. I mean, their own fans think their safeties are both NFL players. I'm not sure about that because statistically they're not great and their defense is not great overall. I think they're helped by this pressure that they bring from everywhere to confuse offenses. So you kind of have to simplify your offense so that you're not victimized by, not knowing who's going to blitz. So I think Wimsatt needs to get outside, but there are going to be some negative plays. You just have to accept that. But he's going to have to at least threaten that he could go there. And I think Rutgers wins this game if they can just outwill Maryland. And it's easier said than done. I breaking the will of another man is difficult, as anyone knows it's played any sport that's any physical at all. But, I think it's pretty 50-50. I would say I would give Maryland a slight edge. I think that don't be fooled. I think Maryland has maybe a 55 to 60% chance of winning this game just because they have the ability to throw the ball more. But there are plenty of scenarios where if they turn it over in their own territory and Rutgers can pounce on it, Maryland's field goal kicker, not as good as Jay Patel. Their special teams is, even when they were looking for a fake against Nebraska, they were still burned by one. Like, they sometimes try to return kicks when they shouldn't, things like that. And so I think there are opportunities for Rutgers, and this is going to be a battle of two philosophies for sure. Rutgers is going to double down on what they do, and Maryland's going to double down on what they do, and we'll see who comes out on top.
Yeah, I think the term you're looking for is fundamentally sound, which Maryland is a little suspect in. My last point, and kind of leading you off to your last comment. So that being said, right, we know that Maryland has good offense. We know that Rutgers is going to play conservatively. One thing that's kind of bothered me, and I looked it up to verify my suspicions. So in terms of, and if you're talking about imposing your will, right, and wanting it more, I'm really hoping in terms that Rutgers is more aggressive in special teams, and specifically, they only have 4 kick returns all year. They're the only Big Ten team to have single-digit kick returns. Only one other team has less than 15 all year. Rutgers is taking advantage of that rule with their fair catches. I know that they've had some issues in the past, with Rochelle with a couple fumbles, but I just feel like that conservative nature in the kickoff, if they were able to open it up a little bit, and I'm not talking about even having, great run backs per se, but even if they just allowed it to happen, I feel like that can benefit their psyche as a team in terms of being more aggressive in this game. Thoughts?
Since the last game, I'd put Max Melton back there.
Right. I mean, why not? I think this is a game you have to let it ride, right? Just put every wrinkle you have ever thought about, just let it ride.
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of the point I was trying to make last week with Wimsett, which is like one of the reasons you don't run him as much is because you don't want him to get hurt. Right. It's the last game.
Right.
Like, I don't want to quote the water boy too much, but it's like, don't hold anything back. Like, this is what we're doing here. Like, there's no.
You got to win this game.
You win this game as a punt returner, because Max Melton is a key guy in their punt blocking unit, and they can dictate a lot of. They've had games where they won this year because the opponent was either scared to punt, their punter was rushing, their punter fumbled the ball because of the threat of a block. And so I get why you don't use Max Melton there, but I think maybe you don't do it just because you need him with Longer being banged up, as against Maryland's 3 receivers, and you're going to have to really hold up. But I mean, for one game, it might be an emotional boot. Like, maybe if he wasn't banged up, maybe you'd even put Monungai back there. He's not like as fast in the open field, but just from an emotional standpoint, it might have an impact.
Yeah, and you're even talking about punt. I'm not even talking about punt. I'm talking about kickoff returns. Fair catching it on the 12-yard line. It's a little maddening. And I think that it's like, I get the conservative nature at times on offense, but when you see that in the return game on special teams, I don't know. I don't think it helps your mindset as a team. Yeah, I understand they want to prevent mistakes on special teams, but still.
I think it's the same type of thing that you would treat like punt, where if like fake punts, because every team pretty much practices, okay, this is our fake punt for the week. If the defense shows us this look, we're going to do it. And so it's not always the same. Sometimes the punter's going to throw it. Sometimes you're going to run it to the side. Sometimes to the up back, whatever. And I feel like with kickoff, there should be at least one in the bag each week that, like, okay, if it's short to the right, we're going to return it. Or if it's, you know what I mean? Like, it would be fairly easy to do that from a special teams coordinator. And I'm not going to say they need a full-time special teams coordinator, because I don't think they do. But that is what that person would be doing if you had it. I just think, I think you got to show your players. And we talked about this the last 2 games. Like, Iowa showed their players that they were trying to win. And it gave them confidence they hadn't had offensively all season. And so if you can do that with special teams, you can do it with defense. And so I think momentum is going to be huge in this game. Maryland is very hot and cold. They get very cold and they get very hot. You can't let them get hot, but at the same time, if they're cold, you have to pounce. You have to push them. And they're going to be on a little bit of a deflation as well because they thought they could have won that game last week against Michigan, which they absolutely could have. They could have won. And so you got to just do what all these other teams did to them in the month of October and just try to grind them down. And then if they go for that tush push and you can stop them, I mean, Billy Edwards, 2 of those 3 touchdowns he had on fourth and goal from the 1. 1 was on 2nd and goal, but 2 were 4th and like inches basically. And if you can stuff that, the emotional high that you'll get from it, even if you have to then go 3 plays and punt, like that's a huge momentum shifter. And those are the type of plays that Rutgers needs in this game. Again, I think Maryland is a slight favorite. I think the point was 2-point line and then it was down to 1. But like when you talk about why in NFL, every game's a toss up like this for the most part because of the parity. But what makes college football great is you only get 3 or 4 of these types of games a year and you got to win them.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to this game. Rutgers has beaten Maryland every 3 years, 14, 17, 20. So if you believe in that, it's on our side, but
we'll I like that stat. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
And the other thing, too, is that as frustrated as people have been the last 3 weeks, and obviously Rutgers playing 3 of the top 15 teams in the country, a win at Maryland would, I mean, that's about as realistic best case scenario for a regular season as you could have had coming into the season, winning 7 games, beating Maryland, finishing above them, winning the most Big Ten games since joining the conference. It really would be a tremendous way to end the regular season. And to your last excellent point about Max Melton returning, I think it makes even more sense because someone that's been really good in that similar role this year has been Eric Rogers, who almost had a block 2 games ago that would have potentially changed that Iowa game. So let's see what happens there. But thank you so much for joining once again. And we'll have, another episode next week where we'll kind of recap some bigger picture things and then obviously talk about whichever bowl game Rutgers is going to. So at the end of the day, this is a lot more fun than it's been in recent years. And thanks for an awesome regular season on the podcast. And thanks to everyone who's been listening here at the Scarlet Faithful.